Hey there, welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, where we journey together into deep discipleship. I'm Brian Fisher, and this is episode 124, Snakes and Doves. You've ventured with us into the meat of season 6, and we've been tackling a big question. What does it mean to think, act, relate, and love more like Jesus? If he is the object of our spiritual formation, if we are designed to be increasingly made into his image, what is he really like? Here at Soil and Roots, we're all about diving beneath the surface. So we're attempting to explore this question holistically. We aren't satisfied with simple explanations that remain in the shallow waters where it's just safe and comfortable. No, not here. We've just finished discussing Jesus' tendency to be enigmatic, confusing, even cryptic. This trait was challenging to people in his day, and frankly, it still is today. But if we fail to press into that and ask what it means for us as his followers, we're missing an opportunity to embrace a critical facet of our King. So today, we're going to be looking at another characteristic of Jesus that isn't always talked about in modern Christianity, his remarkable relational discernment, his shrewdness. Jesus possesses an incredible ability to see people for who they are, even at a heart level. He demonstrated a very nuanced mastery of every situation, as well as, yes, shrewdness in how he dealt with others. So as we seek to embrace and absorb the traits of Christ, those that he embodied, is it just enough for us to know that he was relationally discerning, or should we expect that as we become more like him, we will be more relationally discerning at the heart level? We've been exploring how people are hardwired by God to form belief really in two ways, through the head and also through the heart. We gain knowledge of truth through our minds, but to be complete, for our belief to be whole, our hearts have to somehow experience that truth. So we want to pursue Jesus not just on an intellectual level, but at a heart level that we can experience. So let's dig into this wonderful characteristic of Jesus, his capacity to be relationally discerning. And of all the fictional sleuths that mystery writers have given the world, none is so famous as the great detective himself, Sherlock Holmes. In Arthur Conan Doyle's very first Holmes story, A Scandal in Bohemia, a disguised man comes to visit Holmes. Sherlock observes the man's hands, noticing a tan line and roughness. He notes the man's clothing and the quality of his linen. He perceives the man's nervousness and attempts to conceal his identity. From these clues, Holmes deduces that the man has traveled by bicycle, that he is a person of high standing who has recently engaged in strenuous activity, and that he is not who he claims to be. Piecing all these clues together on the spot, Sherlock Holmes deduces the man's true identity as the King of Bohemia, even before the king reveals himself. Sherlock Holmes has an amazing ability to draw significant conclusions from seemingly insignificant details. Using his keen observation skills and knowledge of human behavior, he's a master of deduction. He can peer through words, through distractions, even through social masks, to see who a person truly is. This great detective seems to possess an almost superhuman ability as he discerns things that no one else can detect. Yet, whenever he explains his trail of deductions, he seems to find it perfectly reasonable to expect that others do the same. As he routinely puts it, elementary, my dear Watson. When we look at Jesus, he displays an ability to see beyond the surface that surpasses even the detective from 221B Baker Street. In an instant, he can discern the heart of the person and the situation. Now, we might reasonably say, well, what's that to me? I mean, Jesus is, after all, God, and we certainly aren't God. However, those who follow Jesus do have God within them in the person of the Holy Spirit. Now, we might say, sure, but look, Jesus showed an unbelievable capacity to see people for who they are and to treat them based on what was in their hearts. Well, yes, he did, but perhaps we should expect to develop the same sort of ability, to listen to discern people's hearts, even imperfectly. Now, Jesus had a different relational style depending on who he was dealing with and what the circumstances of the interaction. Sometimes he used language that he knew would push people away, such as when he said, "Eat my body and drink my blood." That certainly seems like it's something that you'd want to say if you wanted to clear a room. But other times he was plain spoken and direct. He cut to the quick without any room for misinterpretation. With crowds, he was a teacher and a guide. With his group of 12, he was both a master and a friend, and he revealed himself in a closer, more trusting way. Then he had an inner circle of 3 with Peter, James, and John, and with that group, he was even more intimate. Interestingly, Jesus sometimes kept secrets or shared information with only a precious few. He trusted his inner circle with more, whether witnessing his transfiguration or raising Jairus' daughter from the dead. Today, there can be a sort of expectation for Christians to always be transparent and open with everyone. We're always supposed to be honest. We're supposed to be vulnerable. We're supposed to be forthright, right? But Jesus actually wasn't always that way, even with some of his closest friends. Jesus could be gentle. He could also be brutally frank. He was attuned to the motivations of the hearts of others, and he related to people according to the motives of their hearts. He treated people differently. He treated them uniquely. So how might we be able to do the same thing? Well, one way is to just listen to people. We don't listen to just their words, but also to their hearts through the signs and signals they give that many people look right past. We can pick up on these clues like detectives, and we can ask the Holy Spirit to guide us in this. In the 1960s, studies by psychology professor Albert Mehrabian led to his 7-38-55 rule of communication, which suggests that only 7% of meaning is conveyed through spoken words, 38% through the tone of the voice, and a whopping 55% through body language. I don't think his findings are a universal rule, but they illustrate an important truth. There is far more to what we communicate than just what we speak. So think about it. How many of us have gotten in trouble with our significant others because we only paid attention to what they were saying and we missed what they were really saying? Maybe we ask our spouse how they're doing and they slam down the book they're reading and say, "I'm fine." What happens if we answer, "Oh, okay, great"? Chances are we'd be in a bit of trouble. We're expected to know our spouses better than that, to listen to their hearts more than just their words. When you live with someone for years, you hopefully learn to pick up on a few subtle clues. They might be tiny hints that other people would completely miss. Parents can often do this with their kids. Best friends might have this awareness. If we're playing poker, we could talk about a player's tell, the giveaways that they're bluffing or they have a winning hand. We all give outward signs that reveal what's going on with our hearts inside. Here at Soil and Roots, we've assigned that a term. We call them the 8 indicators. So we practice what we call heart listening, which is in part learning to pay attention to those 8 indicators, to the outward signs of our inward reality, and then using that attunement to better love and serve the other person well. Back in season 2, episode 33, I shared a whole episode on heart listening, and I encourage you to go back and give it a whirl because it ties directly to what we're discussing today, some 90 episodes later. But here's a very brief recap. Heart listening is the discipline of attuning to others' inner lives so that we may love and serve them better. Jesus is a master at this. In Mark 2, Jesus knows the motives of the Pharisees when he heals a man and tells them his sins are forgiven. The Pharisees try to trick Jesus with a loaded question, but Mark tells us that Jesus, quote, knew their hypocrisy. Jesus knew the motivations in Judas's heart. He knew that Peter would deny him. Jesus knew the heart of the woman at the well. He knew the heart of the Syrophoenician woman. And we see the same sort of heart-listening habit with the apostles in the book of Acts. This is not just constrained to Jesus. Peter heals the lame beggar, a man who didn't even ask for it. He discerns the selfish motivations in the hearts of Ananias and Sapphira, and he senses that Simon the magician's heart is not quite in the right place. Paul, for example, senses a man has enough faith to be healed without ever speaking to him. People who walk closely with Jesus have an intense curiosity about the conditions of the hearts of those around them. And it appears sometimes the Holy Spirit reveals it for the truth or healing of that person. But God has also created us such that there are ways beyond the seemingly supernatural to discern the hard issues of those around us. For one thing, we can ask gentle questions that invite others into deeper, trusted relationships of formation. These questions show intense curiosity and genuine interest in the other person. So in Roots, we practice this habit in these small groups that we call greenhouses. As we listen to the hearts of others, we can pay attention to the 8 heart view indicators. All of season 2, we explored these 8 indicators. You might recall there are thoughts, our emotions, our health, our behaviors, relationships, our words, and how we use time and money. Each of these indicators reveals what's going on in our hearts. Sometimes they reveal a disconnect between what we profess to believe and the genuine ideas that govern our inner lives. So, for example, when it comes to the indicator of words, try listening carefully to what someone doesn't say. What are the topics they avoid? What are the discussions they leave? What are the areas of hurt or sensitivity? And how can we gently and compassionately invite them into a deeper relationship that can bring healing? This model of interacting with others goes beyond merely hearing their words and receiving information. So much of the modern Christian ecosystem today relies on that kind of system, on monologue instead of dialogue. Beyond that, we live in a fast-paced, somewhat frenetic world with little time or energy to spare. But heart listening requires us to slow down and to be intentional. Journalist Krista Tippett puts it this way: listening is about being present, not just about being quiet. Or as psychiatrist M. Scott Beck once said, true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. So as we practice heart listening, we may realize that what's said first is rarely what's really being said. So my co-host, Dr. Tim, shared a personal story with me that illustrates this pretty well. This is what he wrote. This past week, I had a day when I was struggling. I work mostly from home, but on this day, the work was just piling up. The kids needed my attention, and I was just feeling overwhelmed and frustrated that I just wasn't getting enough done. I told my wife, Christy, that I was going to work at a coffee shop for the afternoon and fix a sandwich to eat in the car. Before I left, I found a note from her in my lunch. It said something like, "Thank you for working so hard for your family. You're doing a great job." It's really a small thing, but it literally turned my whole day around. I felt seen. Christy knows me so well that she could just tell by watching me that I was stressed out. And she discerned why. I wasn't saying it or even thinking it, but my heart was expressing this: I should be accomplishing more, and that ultimately meant that I'm not doing a good job providing for my family. My wife wrote exactly what my heart needed to hear on that note. By the time I reached the coffee shop, I was smiling again. I realized how fortunate I am to have kids who want their dad involved in their lives, and a wife who sees my heart and handles it with care. A few words on a sticky note made all the difference. End quote. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. And there's another aspect to relational discernment to explore. Jesus both models and teaches what we often call shrewdness. Now, the word shrewd means having or showing sharp powers of judgment, and it means to be astute. And astute means an ability to notice and understand things clearly. So shrewdness is that kind of relational discernment that we've been discussing. It means being perceptive and seeing what others might miss, utilizing the wisdom and judgment gained from experience, and demonstrating keen awareness and understanding of situations and people. Being shrewd can also have negative connotations. Shrewd people can also be seen as calculating or even sly, with a kind of cunning cleverness. Shrewdness can admittedly tilt toward good or evil, can be used for one's own advantage or for the good of others. And sometimes that area of goodness seems to be a gray zone. We'd all like to think that God's moral imperatives are strictly black and white, but reality can often be all shades of gray. Some of the most challenging passages of the Bible acknowledge this, and often in these cases the word shrewd applies well, the same word David uses for God in Psalm 18. So one of the most powerful examples is in Luke 16. Jesus relates the parable of the shrewd manager. This is actually one of his most vexing parables. So to sum up the story, a rich man has a manager who has done a poor job of stewarding the rich man's wealth. So his master fires him. Now the manager thinks he's not strong enough to dig, he's too proud to beg, so he better make some other rich friends and right quick. The manager goes to the merchants who owe his master money and asks them how much they owe, and he slashes their bills so that they owe less. That way he figures when he's out of a job, they'll be grateful to him and offer him a position when his current boss kicks him to the curb. It appears as if he basically defrauds his boss to save his own skin. And here's where the story takes a bit of an odd turn. Jesus says the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. In other words, people that don't know Jesus are often more shrewd, more relationally wise than those who do. It's a rather shocking statement. Jesus commends the manager's cunning, his dishonesty, and seems to suggest that his followers could learn a thing or two from this. Now, some Bible commentators have argued that the manager gave up his own commission in the debts he owed. Others have pointed out that this was common practice to overcharge at the start because Mosaic law forbade charging interest to other Jews. So perhaps the manager was simply taking away the overcharge. Dallas Willard suggests that the master didn't even know how to run his own business and would not have collected these debts anyway, so the shrewd manager at least got him something rather than just walking away, and that's what is commended. I don't know, those may be accurate ways of breaking down the passage, but they also sort of explain away the difficulty that we're wrestling with. Well, we're not going to solve that today. Nevertheless, most commentators agree that the manager was at least wise enough to plan for his own future. If the unrighteous know how to use money to win friends and influence people and secure a future, how much more should God's children utilize righteous means to act wisely in regarding to kingdom principles? When Jesus sends out the 12 in Matthew 10 to the lost sheep of Israel, he says they are to show relational discernment and change their actions based on how they are received. Jesus said, quote, "As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it isn't, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet." He also tells his disciples, "I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." Like snakes and doves, be shrewd and innocent. That is the balance we strive for. Sometimes it's neither clear nor easy. It might be one of those dreaded shades of gray where there just aren't any simple answers. There's another example that's worth exploring, and I've had a few debates about: the Hebrew midwives in Exodus 1. Pharaoh, worried that the Israelites are growing too numerous, orders the Hebrew midwives to kill every single baby Israelite boy. But the midwives fear God more than Pharaoh, so they disobey and let the boys live. When Pharaoh summons them and demands to know why they ignored his command, the midwives flat out lie. So, they've broken a commandment. Does God punish their deception? Quite the opposite. The Bible says, so God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Perhaps the midwives were actually barren prior to this. Maybe that's why they were midwives. Well, does this mean the Bible endorses dishonesty and lying? That'd be a hard case to make, considering Ananias and Sapphira were struck dead when they lied in the book of Acts. But there appears to be a difference between lying to protect innocent life and lying to protect oneself, one's own reputation or wealth. Our heart's motivations seem to be a really, really big deal, even if the end result, aka lying, is the same. These are a difficult passage. As I mentioned, Exodus 1, I've actually debated with those that believe that lying is wrong in every single circumstance and is never to be accommodated. You might have remembered the old debate tactic of what do you do if a Nazi comes to your door and you're hiding Jews? Do you lie or do you tell them the truth? And there's some interesting responses to those questions. Difficult passage. However, this might all mean that we're pointing to a Jesus who is more complex, more intricate, more nuanced than perhaps we'd like to admit. So recently, The Wizard of Oz has been in the cultural spotlight again with the release of the movie Wicked, based on the Broadway musical, which tells the story from a new perspective. In the classic story, the wizard rules Oz from behind the curtain, not by true magic, but by using props and stagecraft and showmanship. People believed he was a great sorcerer when he arrived by accident in Oz, and he maintains that illusion in order to keep order. When Dorothy's friends arrive with their request for a brain, a heart, and courage, he sends them on a quest and then ultimately grants what they desire. But the wizard realizes that the Scarecrow already has all the brain he needs, the Lion already has courage, and the Tin Man already has a heart. What they actually need is to recognize what they already possess. So he gives them symbolic gifts, and through the quest and their growing understanding, they come to realize they had their heart's desires all along. This is shrewdness in action. Now, sometimes the wizard is shown as more of a hero, and sometimes as a villain. Should he have just told Dorothy's friends at the start that he had no power and it didn't matter because they already had what they were asking for? That would have been the honest thing, although it would have made for a pretty crummy movie. Would they have believed him, gone on the quest, and agreed that they already had brains, heart, and courage? Probably not. They would have left the Emerald City dejected, cynical, maybe without ever realizing their own strengths and potential. So as Christians, is this kind of shrewdness something to imitate? We may sometimes be overly legalistic about what we perceive as right and wrong, or demand complete transparency from one another simply because we follow Jesus. And for sure, the Bible lays out a moral code that leads to human flourishing, and if we choose to disregard that, it leads to our harm. However, the Bible certainly appears to endorse a certain shrewdness. There's a lot more nuance to how Jesus relates to others than what we might first think. Well, what does it mean for us to attempt to be shrewd and nuanced people as well? Should we expect that as we continue to be formed more like Jesus, we will become more shrewd, we'll become more relationally discerning, that we withhold our hearts and even information from certain people in certain circumstances? Does that sound right? One thing is for sure, intentionally becoming people who listen to the hearts of God and others, and certainly ourselves, can only be good for the world. To become more attuned to God's desires and to better serve those around us is a fantastic way to continue to usher in the kingdom. Author Parker J. Palmer writes, quote, "To listen fully means to pay close attention to what is being said beneath the words. You listen not only for what someone knows, but for who someone is," end quote. Each person is wonderfully unique and deserves a wonderful, unique response. Thanks for being with me today. I appreciate it. If you'd like more information on Soil and Roots, you can simply go to our website, which is at soilandroots.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to make a safe, tax-deductible contribution to our work, you can give safely and securely at that same address, soilandroots.org. If you'd like to check us out on social media, you can find us all over the place. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Soil and Roots Podcast, Soil and Roots Podcast. We're on YouTube at just Soil and Roots. If you're a reader, if you'd like to check out other readers, there's a fairly new social media platform called Substack. We have a following there of over 100,000 people who read and check out the Soil and Roots articles that we post there. And you can find us on Substack at Soil and Roots. This episode was written by the great Dr. Tim Boswell. I edited it, and Zach Fisher produced it. He also provides the music for our podcast, and you can check him out on Spotify at FishU. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can always do so simply by sending us an email at fish@soilandroots.org. Thanks again for being with me this episode, and we'll see you next time.